So just thank you to Alice and Caleb for getting us off to an amazing start. Our city poets have been an incredible part, of our city journey. When we were recruiting, we described the positions as like journalists are there to capture the facts and poets are there to capture the soul, of Bristol. And then we have our incredible youth mayor Alice, and I will say she's not just had an impact within Bristol, but in reaching out to youth mayors across Europe, through Eurocities, across the UK, and even into the United States, and now through the Commonwealth Local Government Forum as well, has begun to really rally and organise the voice of young people in politics around the world, and that is coming out of Bristol, and it's been absolutely something amazing. I do just need to start, though, just by asking us to give some time just to thought about what life can be like for some people in Bristol. Last week, we had a tragedy in Bristol of a young man killed on our streets. And first off, I want to extend my respects to his family. And I also think it's important from the conversations I've had to share with you that the messages I received on the morning after the young man's passing were of people telling me that he was a good young man. He was vulnerable and he needed support. And it's very important that whatever headlines fly around, we remember that there are young people out there like that. I had actually met him myself. He was over at Empire Fighting Chance, and I'd invited him down. I gave him my business card and invited him down for a cup of tea. And it's a real sadness for me that we never had that cup of tea, and we never will get to have that cup of tea. But his tragic death should remind us all that we have very different experiences of Bristol, and we must be respectful of those differences if we are serious about building an inclusive city. I do just have to give some thanks now, and first I want to thank Hugh Brady, who I've lost sight of. But Hugh, thank you again for hosting the annual State of the City address. And just for all of you who don't know, Hugh is going to move on to a new chapter in life, and we wish you all the best, Hugh, as you move off to be the VC of Imperial College London. And just to say that the work you've done to take Bristol on a journey to becoming a civic university and to deliver the new Temple Quarter campus that you'll see going up behind the train station will leave a real legacy in Bristol. I also want to extend my thanks to Andrew Kelly, and Andrew's been the chief executive of Festival of Ideas now is called Bristol Ideas, for 29 years, and he's contributed hugely to Bristol's cultural life and the quality of our public discourse, and he's helped to make Bristol better, raising our profile on the national and the international stage. And I also need to thank you, Bristol, the city. This is my first State of the City since being re-elected, and I absolutely recognise the mayoral position is not mine, it's loaned to me by you, and I thank you for entrusting it into my care again. So we're 18 months now on from the first COVID lockdown. From the beginning, we explained we were not just dealing with the virus itself, but the consequences of the actions needed to stem the spread of the virus. We have seen the impact: death and bereavement, the disruption to education, loneliness, hunger, mental health, domestic violence, job losses. And at the same time, our underlying inequalities have been compounded, as it's the most marginalised who have been hit first and hardest, and then found themselves least well placed to benefit from any recovery. And we're going to be living with the effects of the pandemic for decades, or maybe I should say for generations. That makes it all the more important that we don't allow the pain to be for nothing. And I think there are 3 interdependent lessons we have the opportunity to learn if we choose to. The first reinforces points I shared in my address last year, where I cited Richard Horton from The Lancet. And he argued we aren't suffering merely from a pandemic, but what he called a syndemic, in which 2 categories of disease are interacting: the communicable disease, COVID-19, and the non-communicable diseases that cluster around poverty and inequality. And this is what he said, that the most important consequence of seeing COVID-19 as a syndemic is to underline its social origins. The vulnerability of older citizens, black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, and key workers who are commonly poorly paid with fewer welfare protections points to a truth so far barely acknowledged, that unless governments devise policies and programs that reverse profound disparities, our societies will never be truly COVID secure. The economic crisis, and he goes on to say, the economic crisis that is advancing towards us will not be solved by a drug or a vaccine. Nothing less than national revival is needed. Approaching COVID-19 as a syndemic will invite a larger vision, one encompassing education, employment, housing, food and environment. And we, these are my words now, not his, we must have that broader vision. If we don't, then we will remain individually and collectively vulnerable to future health shocks with all their consequence. And it's this collective vulnerability that makes tackling social inequality, that takes tackling social inequality beyond an issue of mere social justice and makes it an issue of national security. And in many ways we can learn from Bristol's past on this front. In 1832, cholera killed 584 Bristolians from a population of just 96,000. And it's the poorest who were hit first and hardest. The impact exacerbated by overcrowded and unsanitary conditions in slums and workhouses. We came to learn that while the water was the means for transmission, it was the drivers and consequences of poverty that were the accelerants. Both then and today, the resilience and weakness of population health are not just biomedical questions. They are determined by social conditions, themselves the product of political and economic systems. The second lesson is that COVID has humbled us and warned us. It's given us a taste of a natural world reasserting its authority. In the modern era, we've believed that we have the ability to control things, that whatever the crisis, someone somewhere could solve it. So we could decide not to go to war or feed hungry people. We could decide to house the homeless. But we have now tasted living in a world in which no one, nowhere, could simply make a decision to end the crisis. Until we had the vaccine, the virus stopped us in our tracks. The economy stopped. Elections were postponed. Schools were closed, and our flagship public service teetered on the edge of being overwhelmed. We do now have the vaccine, and with it, the hope that eventually we'll be able to live with COVID. So now, we need to apply that experience of the loss of control to the urgency we bring to the climate emergency. If we pass the tipping point, there will be no hope for recovery. Weather chaos and disorder will feed on each other with rapidly worsening social, economic and political consequences. This threat points to what civil rights activist and Harvard scholar Marshall Gans called the urgency of the now. And this leads to the third insight, which is the importance of cities. Climate change will be won or lost in cities. Cities are home to over half the world's people. They consume over 70% of the world's energy and generate 3/4 of global carbon emissions. And yet cities also offer amongst the most sustainable lifestyles. Higher density living can offer lower carbon footprints than sprawling settlements if they are done right. The former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, said, most of the things that make cities better, cleaner, healthier and more economically productive places also reduce carbon emissions. It's a simple statement containing a profound truth, that cities are the places where good social policy will lessen the carbon footprints of the greatest number of people and offer the greatest opportunity to minimize the price the planet pays for our growing world population. So we have two major crises, the pandemic and climate, pointing us to the need to expedite delivery of progressive social policy and better living conditions through cities. So let me take you through some of the ways we are doing that here in our city of Bristol. On climate, we have worked with the city to agree and collectively commit to the One City Climate Strategy and its 2030 carbon neutral and climate resilience targets. We launched our Ecological Emergency Action Plan last month. The plan was led by Avon Wildlife Trust and developed with 36 city organisations. It commits us to 30% of our land being managed for nature, a 50% reduction in the use of pesticides, 100% of Bristol's waterways being fit to support healthy wildlife, and a reduction in the use of products that undermine the health of wildlife and wider ecosystems. We've invested £42 million on retrofitting council-owned homes. 6,500 homes now having had gas boilers replaced. 800 houses and 1,000 flats now having wall insulation. 1,000 new insulated roofs. 2,500 with double glazed replacements. 2,000 have had loft insulation top-ups. Today, 99% of publicly owned homes have double glazing, 98% have insulated cavity walls. We've also planted 70,000 new trees through One Tree Per Child, a programme commenced by my predecessor George Ferguson and continued by us. More than 9,000 were planted last year, including Bristol's first mini forest in Southmead. A business scheme has set a target to plant at least 250,000 trees. All this contributes to our One City Plan goal to double the city's tree canopy by 2046. And we're working with the University of Manchester and the Met Office to understand our city's vulnerability to overheating and how we can protect ourselves from severe heat waves. We've invested £22 million in renewable energy projects and low-carbon heat networks. Our district heating network already serves Old Market, Redcliffe and Hartcliffe, with Bedminster, Temple Quarter and St Philip's soon to join them. We're installing a zero-carbon water source heat pump in Castle Park that will heat 1,000 council homes and Castle Park View. And the Bedminster Heat Network will source its energy from wastewater. Bristol City Funds has invested £750,000 in Ambition Lance Weston's wind turbine that will provide renewable energy to over 4,000 homes. And our City Leap partnership promises to transform our city's relationship with energy through a £1 billion package of investment to support system change from the generation and distribution to the storage and smart usage of energy. We're building new flood defences at Avonmouth and Severside, and this is an incredible scheme that combines flood protection with restored natural wetland habitats. We're working with the Environment Agency to deliver flood defences for the whole city centre and the land along the River Avon. We're working with developers to build flood defences into new developments in floodplain areas. And as the country now starts asking government how it will fund its zero-carbon climate strategy, we're already working with the World Economic Forum and the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission to connect cities around the world with the public and private finance we need to fund our decarbonisation. The cost of decarbonising Bristol alone is nearly £10 billion, and this is part of a £200+ billion package needed to decarbonise the UK's core cities and London. On housing, we would have built over the last 5 years some 9,000 new homes by the end of this year, with 12,000 more homes with planning permissions in the pipeline having been delayed by COVID and Brexit. We have 173 homes being built by Bocklock on Airport Road. In Lockleys, we have 185 homes in Bonington Walk and 268 in Romney House being built by our own council-owned company, Gorham Homes. There's many more. We have at least 1,400 new homes on their way in Hengrove. Not only will around 50% of these be affordable, but they will set a benchmark for off-site modern methods of construction and low-carbon development. And now with Bristol Zoo relocating, we have an incredible opportunity to deliver affordable homes in Clifton. We have set ourselves another stretching target of 2,000 homes a year by 2024. And we've set up Project 1000, a council board whose sole aim is to deliver 1,000 affordable homes a year by 2024. On top of that, we've launched an estate renewal programme. We're overhauling Home Choice. We've extended the moratorium on evictions for council tenants. We've joined the advisory board of the Kerslake Commission on ending rough sleeping. And we're on our way to becoming a living rent city. On transport, our flagship policy remains the mass transit system, including the Underground. All routes have been identified, linking the north, east, south and airport to the city centre. It will integrate buses and trains and include new stations to form a transformative, low-carbon transport system for Bristol. We laid the foundations with our bus deal, with First Bus. This gives priority to bus travel to support growth in passenger numbers. This is a key step in building the business case that will secure the over £4 billion investment needed for the mass transit system. We've introduced bus prioritisation, including bus gates on Bristol Bridge and Baldwin Street. This has increased reliability and taken 5 minutes of bus journeys through the city centre. We delivered new city centre bike lanes, pedestrianised the old city, King Street, Cottam Hill, Princess Victoria Street, and 4 pilots are now running for school streets, which close roads outside schools at drop-off and pick-up times. We're about to launch a consultation on the introduction of bus prioritisation for the Wells Road to the city centre, over the Downs and the whole length of the A4018. And we're going to ask you to comment on proposals to remove Parkin on that route that causes congestion on key routes, and the closure of Park Street to private cars. This has the potential to reinvent the public realm up to the Triangle and remove rat runs from the Downs. We submitted the full business case for the Clean Air Zone, which will come into force next year. We're negotiating with government now a package of support, including £2 million for clean buses, £720,000 for a new cycle scheme through Old Market, free electric bike loans and cycle training, free bus tickets, discount on car club membership, support to buy electric vehicles, and financial support for business and residents to upgrade from polluting vehicles. We estimate the Clean Air Zone will reduce traffic travelling into the city centre by around 2,000 vehicles per day, while delivering protections for lower paid workers, hospital patients and visitors, and blue badge holders. Over half a century ago, Bristol lost its trams. 20 years ago, lost out on an opportunity for super trams. This was down to poor leadership, impenetrable council structures and regional squabbles. We have the opportunity today to get beyond these historical failures and deliver something transformative. We need government funding and support, and we must ensure that the West of England Combined Authority unlocks the investment Bristol and the city region needs. We need substance, not sound bites. On infrastructure, we are fixing the city's ageing infrastructure, the chocolate path, key bridges around the city, the seawalls and our road networks. These have been deteriorating for decades with no clear plan for their maintenance. We now have that plan, and we have a capital strategy in place. We've also taken on the new infrastructure challenge, such as the arena, where we showed our ability to make the right decision rather than the politically convenient decision. The YTL Bristol Arena is on track to open in early 2024, and the Massive Attack gig showed us that people can and will travel from all parts of the city and beyond to visit. Repurposing the aircraft hangars rather than building a city centre arena from scratch was the right thing to do for the environment. Using the footprint and fabric of the existing building saves 21,400 cubic metres of concrete, the excavation and removal of 28,000 cubic metres of soil, and the manufacturing and transportation of 4,000 tonnes of steel. The environmental impact of the Temple Island Arena in development and production in steel alone will be the equivalent of 13,000 flights from Heathrow to New York. Contrast this with YTL's building of one of the most environmentally sustainable arenas in the world, with solar panels, reused rainwater, and a sustainable transport plan. And of course, at no cost to the taxpayer. On social care, we've been tackling the crisis that is local government finance. The real costs of COVID and over a decade of austerity mean that the city again faces the challenge of an underfunded council budget. We're working through the numbers right now, but as of today, we have a potential shortfall of £42 million. That may lead to more difficult decisions for the city. Other cities have similar challenges. Projected shortfalls in other core cities range from £15 million to £65 million. COVID has accelerated the already increasing demand for adult social care at the same time as the cost of care services has increased. We've had a 21% increase in mental health demand at a cost of £4 million a year. There's been a £45 per person per week increase in unit costs for learning disability services, resulting in costs increasing by more than £3 million a year. And we're now finding care providers unable to recruit workers to fill their positions, contributing to 115 handbacks from domiciliary care providers, and this lack of workforce is driven by the availability of higher paid employment in other sectors, reduced access to EU nationals due to Brexit, and an increased demand for care staff in other organisations, including the National Health Service. Big challenges. So I must share that as we have accelerated delivery for Bristol to take on the opportunities and meet these challenges, we've experienced increasing opposition, resistance to change, and highlighting the downside of every intervention. The truth is that no intervention, no decision comes without risk and cost. But as Shirley Williams said, there are hazards in anything one does, but greater hazards in doing nothing. Bristol is a city of 42 square miles. We aren't getting any more land. We have a residential population of around 460,000 people, which is expected to grow to 550,000 people by 2050. The population grows to over 1 million people when the workforce travels in during the day. We have more than 15,000 people on our housing waiting list, with over 1,100 households in temporary accommodation. 1 in 5 of our children live in low-income households. In 2015, the Runnymede Trust ranked Bristol as the 7th worst area in England for racial inequality, and went on to say that ethnic minorities in Bristol experience greater disadvantage than in England and Wales in education and employment. While almost 100% of Clifton teenagers progress to university, it's just 1 in 12 in Hartcliffe. Almost 10% of our households experience fuel poverty, and 4% experience moderate to severe food insecurity. There is a gap in healthy years life expectancy of around 16 years between the richest and the poorest areas of Bristol. We need the city and public leaders to agree and hold themselves accountable to the depth and complexity of these challenges. There is no different kind of reality, only big, complex challenges. As the University of Virginia's Professor Jerry Warburg said, you're entitled to your own opinions, not your own facts. We are not entitled to our own reality. Bristol leadership is a collective act, and our city's activism has been a key part of that. Our activism has been incredibly valuable, but in itself, that is not enough. In September's full council, 3 people made statements, each in turn. The first argued against house building on western slopes and argued against urban sprawl. The second, concerned about private rents, told me to sort out the housing crisis that would require me to build homes. The third then made a statement against children living in tall buildings, and that comes against a broader context of a campaign against height and density in the middle of the city. 3 activists, 3 conflicting messages, all pointing at me. I suggested in that meeting that they actually talk to each other, because all 3 made an argument that to be solved would require compromise from the other 2. It's fine to point at me, but what we need is the city to engage in a conversation. To solve the complexity of the problems in our city, we all need to work together and beyond receive as well as transmit. And I've learnt these lessons. In my 20s, I was all transmit. In 2000, I was protesting outside the World Bank in Washington, D.C. with a crowd, part of a protest of thousands, shouting, as it turned out, at low-paid security workers for defending neoliberalism. That was activism at its worst, more focused on the emotional gratification of the activists and their brand than the causes they claim to be fighting for. The historian and writer Paul Gilroy said, it is imperative to remain less interested in who or what we imagine ourselves to be than in what we can do for one another. At its best, activism creates the conditions for and builds the unlikely alliances that make more radical politics possible. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson succeeded in bringing the Civil Rights Act into law. Martin Luther King then approached Johnson, congratulated him, and said, "Great, now we need a Voting Rights Act." Johnson told King he couldn't do it, as he cashed in all his political capital to deliver the Civil Rights Act. So King went out and organised Selma. Now, many of you would know what happened next. The marchers were brutally attacked by the police, but the world was watching. And what happened on that bridge changed the political climate. It was a new climate that not only made the Voting Rights Act possible, but made it necessary. And on the 6th of August, 1965, the bill was signed by President Johnson, banning states from passing laws, prohibiting voting laws based on race, bringing into force what is often described as one of the most effective civil rights laws ever enacted. People sometimes say they haven't got time to waste trying to get everyone together. But I think it's also true that we haven't got time to get it wrong. We need a new political settlement in how we understand each other and how we work together. I want to talk a bit now about some of the work we've done outside of Bristol's boundaries. We rarely talk about our global and our national leadership in a way that gives people a chance to engage, but it's something we should all be proud of. What happens in Bristol isn't just down to the decisions we make inside Bristol. We are shaped by national and international events. And to serve Bristol fully, we must be able to shape the context within which Bristol has to live and exert influence over those external forces that impact on life in our city. Trying to tackle city challenges without tackling this context is like straining gnats while swallowing camels. So, I sit on the Mayor's Migration Council, and I sit on the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Cities of Tomorrow. I mentioned it earlier, it's where we're doing so much of our work on international finance. I sit on the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission, where we have identified over £200 billion worth of decarbonisation opportunities across the core cities and London. This year I was asked to become chair of the Local Government Association City Regions Board. I also sat on the Archbishop of Canterbury's Housing Commission, Gordon Brown's Commission on the UK's Future, on the advisory panel for the Work Foundation. Bristol plays a leading role in the Global Parliament of Mayors, Eurocities and UK 100 core cities, and helped to set up the Western Gateway. That's not about boasting about any individual. All these positions we hold are team efforts that include me, my office, the wider council, and our city partners, including our universities and business community. We've set up our own international strategy board in Bristol to coordinate our international activity, to mobilise city partners to represent us as a city and our interests on the global stage. And I want to share, actually, to that end, as part of that, today we can announce the appointment of 3 new international ambassadors for the city. People who, in their daily business and their travels, will go out with a mandate to represent Bristol. And I'll share with you that they are Marty Burgess, a partner at Bevan Britain and chair of Black South West Network, Claire Reddington, the chief executive of Watershed, and Fuad Mohammed, CEO and founder of Ashley Community Housing. And I welcome you to the role, and I know you will all promote Bristol brilliantly, joining our existing alumni of city ambassadors. I want to finish tonight also with another thanks, and that's to members of the Bristol History Commission. They've shown emotionally intelligent leadership as we've navigated an incredibly challenging time in Bristol's history following the hauling down of Colston's statue last year. They helped put together an excellent display in the M Shed of the statue, received and are processing 14,000 responses to their survey on the future of the statue and the future of how we deal with our contentious history. Their work will help us to understand our past, bring a fuller understanding of how our city has become what it is today. Now, our past has been shaped by poverty and slum clearances, investment, slavery, wars, strikes, protests, Chartists, suffragettes, the harbour, the docks, manufacturing, innovation and technology, migration, faith, and so much more. And within that, we have our difficulties and we have our demons. We have our highs and we have our heroes, including those heroes we are yet to learn about because history has not thought to tell their story. And at the same time, building on the History Commission's Bridging Histories programme, our culture team is working towards a family history project that will support people right across the city discover and understand their own personal history and why their families came here or why their families were displaced to parts of Bristol that they ended up being born in. Now, I'll share personally that looking at this opportunity, I've started to look at my own family tree. And during a recent trip, which I met with many members of my Jamaican family, I discovered an important part of my own history. Samuel Richardson was hung by the British. In 1865, not far from Kingston in Jamaica, in Morant Bay, a Baptist preacher called Paul Bogle led the rescue of a black man who had been arrested for trespassing on an abandoned former sugar plantation. Hundreds of people joined him as he led a call for reform. Troops were sent and spent weeks indiscriminately killing black Jamaicans. Executions followed, and among those was Samuel Richardson, my great-great-great-grandfather. And I've thought about him since finding out who he was. And I've reflected on what he would have been feeling as he took part in that rebellion, as he stood on the gallows, whether he was afraid, whether he was thinking about his descendants to come, whether he even thought about his great-great-great-grandson. And that discovery, that reflection has made me more me. And I want to encourage you all to join in this project as we share it with the city to uncover your own family histories. Those histories are our histories. Your histories are our histories. And those histories, when we know them, when we share them, will make us more Bristol. So I've spoken tonight about the conflicting pressures alongside the fundamental challenges, both now and in the future, and our need to deliver. To deliver at the scale and pace of change we need, we must be honest about the nature of those challenges. We must make space for alliances and bring the many with us, keeping the city together and keeping us accountable to the truth and the true nature of those challenges. We must be solutions focused. As the novelist Raymond Williams said, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. So let's choose hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marvin. My name's Andrew Kelly from Bristol Ideas. I'm chairing the panel session that we're going to have now to discuss various issues that came up in Marvin's speech. How do we create something better beyond COVID? How do we build back better? And I want to ask each of you in turn to comment briefly on that, but also reflect perhaps a little bit on what Marvin and our youth mayor talked about. And I'll start with you, Liz. Your project is about thriving places. What makes a thriving place in this post-COVID world?
So it's a big question, isn't it? I think I've been pushing back a bit about this notion of building back, because do we really want to build back? And I think to really thrive, we need to think about some of the lessons we've learned through COVID. And if you talk to people, you don't necessarily need to have a PhD in this to talk to people about what have you learned through COVID? And people have learned what's important to them, what matters. And I think increasingly, and I'm very excited about this because you're seeing it in places right across the UK, increasingly places are recognising that we mustn't build back what we had before. Because what we had before was an economic system that is designed at its very core to support us to consume ourselves to destruction. That wonderful poem we heard earlier. It's designed to create the inequalities that Marvin so eloquently talked about earlier. We need to tackle the underlying symptoms of the underlying causes of the many, many things we're having to deal with as symptoms of COVID, that desperate levels of inequality that we're seeing in our country, and the unbelievable levels of climate emergency, and it's the right word that we are facing, have the root cause in the kind of economic model we currently have. And I think the places that will thrive, and I don't just mean survive beyond, because that's what we're looking at the moment. We're talking about survival in many ways, just physically through COVID, but existentially through the climate crisis. The places that will thrive instead of just survive are the places that take this point in history, and it is a point in history, and say, actually, we're going to be courageous enough, we're going to be brave enough to do things differently. And doing things differently is about having an economy that says, what's it all for? The economy, politics, business, etc., etc. What's it all for? It's there to support us and our planet to thrive into the future. So we need to make that the end goal of all of our economic activity. And if we start at that root cause level, then all of these other things start making sense, and we start having the right culture at the heart of it.
So, thank you, Liz. Ian, you've just written a whole book about this. Well, I'm not going to ask you to recite every argument, but some of the key points that come up about what we do next, really.
Thank you, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah.
It's a privilege to be here and to hear the Mayor's really wonderful state of the city. And inspiring because you get the sense that we're at a crossroads. This is either going to be a time when we have deep reflection and don't bounce back or forward on the same road that's leading us over a precipice, and hopefully not reset to the operating system that is in the system, because that's what's brought us the pandemic, that's what's brought us the climate emergency, that's what's brought us the inequalities we have in Bristol and everywhere else. And we need this to be the wake-up call that the Second World War was, and Bristol, through that process, found a new purpose. And my real hope is that what we're hearing from the Mayor and what Bristolians will go away with is that they can make the city very different. And through that, an inspiration to the rest of the UK and the world.